So first of all, thanks to all of you for giving up your time this evening. I realise it clashes with a major football game and the first edition of Coronation Street. So thank you for all. First of all, just a quick few thanks to people that helped me in my career. First of all, my dad, who's very ill, so he can't be here. But he's a very famous economist. I'm not just saying that. He truly is. So his academic record is an unachievable aspiration for me. He won the Queen's Award for the highest degree mark in his graduating year in Britain. Got a scholarship to America, etc., etc. What he has been is a very critical commentator on my work. He always takes an interest, but when I show him work I've done, he literally marks it with a red pen, like an undergraduate essay, and gives it me back. And maybe his most famous contribution was when I was at Warwick. I popped over to the economics department to do a seminar. Lots of famous economics profs there. I just finished, and my dad literally sat there. I had Andrew Oswald giving me helpful tips, advice, etc. All sorts of clever people being nice to me. And my dad's comment was, "I would have started precisely where you finished." So it's quite a tough commentator. Other people, David Storey, from director at the SME Centre of Warwick for a long time. He gave me my first lowly research job. Then I went away for a couple of years, and then he foolishly re-employed me. But I guess from that great time at the SME Centre at Warwick, where probably we were the best game in the world at that time, in the early to mid-90s. But he taught me that research should always deliver outcomes that are of use to entrepreneurs or government policymakers to help shape and inform their decision-making processes. More generally, he's supported my career since that time to this present day. Other people, Nigel Meager, my director at the Institute of Employment Studies, mainly for turning a blind eye to my creative timesheets over, I don't know, about 5 years. I sent the same timesheet in. Gordon Murray, emeritus now, but was at Warwick, London Business School, and Exeter at various times when I was also around. We've collaborated on venture capital and innovation things for 25 years, probably. To Paul Nightingale, director of Sprue, for spending approximately 10 years trying to convince me that innovation is more than the residual in a productivity equation. I still remain unconvinced. Finally, to Aidan and all my colleagues at business school, for giving me the opportunity to come and work here. I've had a great year and a half, 2 years. And finally, to Wei, the most talented PhD student I've ever had. Now, Wei is here, is a very numerate scholar, so Wei will be doing the counting of the cards on my behalf. Okay, so the reason you've got these cards, simple voting cards, is on generally the presentation, I'm going to pose 5 questions, and then we'll have a vote. So green if you think yes to the question, general approval, and red if you disagree. Then I'll present the evidence, and then we'll have another quick vote again. I know the temptation for academics is never to arrive at conclusion, but in this case, as fast as you like, no one's, apart from Wei's, counting. So let's just have a bit of interaction, a bit of fun, and see if we can challenge some preconceptions about entrepreneurship. So first of all, this is always a problem. How do we actually define entrepreneurs? So to practice the voting, we're going to ask people, I'll run through the list, and you can hold up the green card if you think that particular characteristic or definition is the most defining characteristic of entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial behaviour. So we'll go from 1921, Frank Knight, Chicago School, which believed that entrepreneurship is really defined about your willingness to take risks that other less entrepreneurial people wouldn't take. Schumpeter, the German Austrian school, it was all about innovation. And although Schumpeter actually later contradicted himself, so this is Schumpeter 1, and that roughly said that innovation is most likely to occur in situations away from bureaucracy and hierarchy. That gives people the freedom to act entrepreneurial and to be innovative. So hence it would occur in smaller entrepreneurial firms. The special people or the great person school, it broadly is that only special people, which we then call entrepreneurs, can see opportunities which as normal people can't see, and then they act on those opportunities. The variant is the different people school, which says that we can all see opportunity, but only entrepreneurs act on the opportunity. And then we've got the more modern schools, which is really around a classification or a more practical measurement. Some people would take a very broad view that starting a business, so the action of starting a business, is a defining characteristic of an entrepreneur. And other people move into the wage sector of the economy. And then the slightly nuanced version, the classical school, thinks not only have you got to start a business, but you've actually got to grow one. And roughly, only about 1/3 of all business startups ever achieve any growth at all. They just remain at the same size roughly as the day they started. So let's have a quick vote. Who thinks the risk-taking is the defining characteristic of entrepreneurship? What we got, Way? Quite a few. What about innovation? Is that the defining?
Code? I'm sorry, what is the colour code?
Green if you agree.
Green is?
Yes.
Green is yes.
Innovation. I'm thinking all the Centrum people might have put their cards up, but no. The special people theory, that only special people can spot opportunities. So not many, not very favoured. The different people, a little bit more than the special people. And what about the more practical element? Starting a business is a defining characteristic of an entrepreneur. Quite a few. But starting and growing a business. Okay, so we've got past the definitional things. What's the rough answer?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Only the special peoples.
So the majority, the in-house voted for the special people theory. Okay, so I'm just going to go through 5 questions. We'll vote. So green if you agree, red if you don't. We haven't really got time for detailed questions. So economists aren't allowed to ask questions. Then I'll present my evidence, and then we'll have a quick vote afterwards to see if anyone's changed their views. Right, the first question. If you ever meet an entrepreneur out and about in your daily activities or in a pub, they'll always say, I worked, 200 hours last week. I never sleep. I never see the family, etc., etc. So the broad question is, do entrepreneurs work longer hours than working people, people with wage and salary jobs? Okay, so we've got quite a large green majority, so people believe it's kind of simple question to get you started, but it's important in a policy sense because since about 1981 onwards, all governments have taken the view that because great things are derived or occur when we have more entrepreneurs and more entrepreneurs putting in more hours, more effort, then it's a rational thing to incentivize them to put in more effort, more work, more hours to generate more good things. So they use the tax system to incentivize them. So on average, entrepreneurs will pay a lot less tax per pound earned than wage people, salaried people. And it's justified through the good things that entrepreneurs create. The problem I always had with that was fundamentally that all economists know that there are diminishing marginal returns to working another hour, putting in another unit of effort, and it probably falls quite rapidly once you go past what we would call a standard working week. There's also a philosophical underpinning to why governments give favourable tax treatment to entrepreneurs. Is that more entrepreneurship in an economy reduces the contingent liabilities of the state. So as an entrepreneur, you're responsible for your own pension, your own welfare, sickness, pay, etc., etc. So you lose all the rights that we enjoy as waged employees or salaried employees. So that's basic, forget the kernel density and all that stuff. It's just a basic distribution of the hours, the core working hours, weekly working hours of waged employees. And not surprisingly, particularly given EU legislation in this area, that there's a few part-timers to your left and then a large body of the largest proportion of the working population do between 35, 40 hours a week. And very few kind of go up to anything more than 50, 60 hours. So single entrepreneurs, the non-growing, non-job creating entrepreneurs. So here we see a spreading of the distribution of hours worked, and the peak loading is between 35 and 55 hours a week. So there's more solo entrepreneurs than wage employees working 10, 15 extra hours, and a very much bigger proportion putting in more than 60 hours a week. So if you look at the job creating entrepreneurs, the one quarter to 1/3 of entrepreneurs, then we get a real broadening of the distribution and it shifts to the right. So we get the large body of job creating entrepreneurs work between 38, 60 hours a week, and a considerable number of them work very, very long hours per day, per week. So managing and employing people induces more effort on the part of the entrepreneur. So in that sense, you could, or probably the government would argue, that the tax incentive is justified because the best quality entrepreneurs are putting in more effort, more hours. So I think that's reasonably conclusive about the hours, so entrepreneurs sleep less by implication. But then I looked at if they could choose which hours they worked, and entrepreneurs clearly have less, you could argue, have less ability because they have contracts, they have to fulfill them, they can't go home when they've done their 35 hours as easily as wage employees can. So the purple line is just equality, so we've got down the bottom the actual hours per week you work. Going up the vertical axis, that's the hours you would work if you could choose the hours you work. And the three lines are individual self-employed, so solo entrepreneurs, job creating, so the red line is job creating entrepreneurs, green line's wage salaried people. So what we get down this end is people who are working kind of 10 hours a week. They would choose, if they could, to work 20 hours, so a doubling of the hours if they had the opportunity to work more hours. But at the top end, so for those mad people working 90 hours a week, 70, 90 hours a week, their desirable hours would be 60, 50 hours. So proportionally, the people working not many hours would like to increase their hours proportionally more than the people working very long hours. But the interesting thing for me, and where we are now, the average person, worker, works in that 35 to 40 hours thing, and that would be their chosen hours if they had freedom to choose their contractual hours. But we know that on average entrepreneurs work more hours, so a lot of entrepreneurs work longer than they would choose to, but they do that partially because they're incentivized to do so and to make things work, to look after their employees, grow their business, etc. Probably a more topical thing. So, are bankers evil? So the global financial crisis began with the collapse of Lehman's in the US in September 2008. And then that induced a global economic recession with fairly devastating consequences across all areas, all countries and all areas of the economy. But the question I really want to pose is, do banks deliver enough finance to entrepreneurs, to smaller businesses? And the public policy issue behind it is, if talented entrepreneurs are capital constrained, then the economic outcomes they're able to achieve are suboptimal. So they're undercapitalised and they can't take advantage of all the investment opportunities they have with a positive net present value. So what do people think? Are bankers evil? So green if you think they're evil, red if you think they're okay people. Okay. What we got? Oh, we've got a split vote. So maybe I should have asked this question in 2008. Okay. So now this is fundamental to the way government reacts to the banking sector in the UK and why we have different responses to the global financial crisis in different countries. The UK is unique and stands alone in the world in terms of the absolute size compared to the size of the economy of its banking sector. So if we go all the way back to the 1960s, down there the UK banking sector, or the assets held by the banking sector, were actually below that of the US. But what happened in between, in late 60s, early 70s, we had a massive banking merger wave, a period of consolidation where big banks swallowed up smaller banks. We then had probably a 40-year period of deregulation in banking and financial services. Building societies were demutualised, all sorts of things. Capital restrictions were reduced. And rather strangely, these are all the things that regulators are trying to put back in place now. Exactly the things that were in existence up until probably 1985 in the UK and globally. And we can see, so that was a banking merger, Building Society Act, Big Bang, and then the UK banking sector, or the assets held in the UK banking sector, just increased exponentially from that point.
Mark, you invited very short questions. Why does it flatten during Thatcher's time? Surprising to me. And don't worry if it's not relevant.
Oh, we had a crash in 89-90. That was one of the reasons. We had a problem with George Soros. People like that, who played the game better than the UK government. So where we are now, so the UK, the assets held within the UK banking sector are 5.5 times the total income of the UK in a given year. In the US, they're less than they're about 90% of US GDP. So our banking sector, in terms of its scale, is off the scale in a global sense. And that probably on its own, that graphic explains why UK regulators tread very lightly, to put it politely, when they're dealing with UK banks and generally the City of London. Right, we'll get on to the small firm bit. So these roughly our big four banks for probably 35 years have held their market share of SME lending at around about 80-85%. So that it's a four-firm oligopoly, to use a technical term, but four dominant banking groups supply between 80 and 85% of all SME banking operations in general, but also lending. So this is going from a month after the global Lehman's collapse, going all the way through to early 2013. So loan demand, the blue one, is a proportion of SMEs asking a bank for a loan, going across from late 08 to early 13. The top graphic, the red line, is the willingness of banks to supply loans to firms that requested them. So for example, in December 08, about 28% of all the SMEs, all the 4.5 million SMEs in the UK, asked for a loan from a UK bank, from a bank in the UK, and about 78% of them got the loan. Now for me, the striking characteristic of all the period until we literally get to December 11, the lines go in opposite directions. So what we get immediately after Lehman's collapse, banks overcorrected, they reduced their willingness to lend. But small firms haven't cottoned on at this point that banks have done that, so their demand actually increases. So we get a mismatch in the market. And then when banks get a little bit more willing to supply funding, SMEs are looking back at the 3 months before that, and they've reduced their demand for lending. So basically, whenever one line goes up, you can guarantee for the first 3 years since GFC, the other line goes down. So banks and SMEs are so out of sync for 3 years post the GFC. And it's only 3.5 years later when the lines start going in the right direction. So when one moves up, the other one moves up. So entrepreneurs, SMEs are in sync with the bank's willingness to supply loans to them. Pre-GFC, it's probably true that in a reasonably good year, about 90% of funding applications from SMEs would be successful. So we're largely below that. So the post-Gfc fallout meant that firms, we had two effects. Firstly, firms were unwilling to ask for loans, or the fewer SMEs asked for loans, because they believed that banks had over-rationed credit. And then when banks finally decided or realised that actually they have to lend money to make money, then small firms were slow to catch on. But it's not in a comparative sense. So this is looking just across Europe. And actually our loan success, given conditional on the fact you actually apply for a loan, we have fewer firms than most countries who apply for loans, but of those who do, we have not too bad, 80-85% actually get the loans. It's questionable whether 85% is a bad figure, a bad number, or a reasonably good one. So if we look at, if you do get a loan, what do you pay for it? So we've got net interest margins. So obviously in Greece, if you are lucky enough to get a loan, which is very unlikely, you're paying a lot for it. And people often use the German banking system, which has heavy state involvement, cooperative banks, mutual finance associations, all sorts of things in there. People often use that as an exemplar of a great banking system capable of delivering better outcomes to SMEs. But in fact, although they had a slightly higher willingness to supply funds to SMEs rate, you're paying more for it in Germany if you do get a loan. And that's kind of quite interesting, given that a large part of the German banking system is state-owned, and it's channeled through regional banking, government-owned banks. But the German government does quite a clever thing, which would be illegal if they weren't Germany and they hadn't been doing it for 50 years. And so the EU won't touch them. KfW, their development operation, is probably illegal under EU law, under state aid rules. But obviously no one's going to mention that. But what the German government does is uses its AAA credit rating to raise money on international financial markets, and then it channels that cheap cash through its own state banks to SMEs. So it's quite a clever way, and it would be in direct competition with non-state banks, with private banks. So it wouldn't be allowed now. So the picture's not quite as clear cut. So I'm thinking, well, where does it add up? It's clear that banks have caused some major problem, but where is it showing, and why are they still not as severe on SMEs as they might be, or certainly the newspapers think? And the story is there. So the blue one is the share of total bank income earned from lending stuff, so loans, and the red one is the share of total bank income earned from non-lending services, so your fees, your account charges, the services. So in the old days, virtually all of bank income was from lending. In modern world, these days, 2/3 of bank income typically is earned from non-lending related activity. So fees, account charges, other services. So what banks do is quite a rational on their part and clever thing, is they make monopoly or very supernormal, above competitive profits on the services they sell, and they use that to cross-subsidise the loan book lending that they do. And why do they do that? Because lending is the way, offering loans is a way to lock in customers. Because once an SME is with a bank, they literally never move. Probably 4% move in a decade, despite increasing competition, internet banking, all these things. The landscape has remained the same. Once you're with a bank, and that's probably true on personal accounts as well, you don't move. So that's where they extract their profit, by giving you the softer loans so they can extract the surplus profit, the supernormal profit, from all the other stuff of the banking relationship. So where are we now? How many people think bankers are evil, banks are nasty to SMEs? Where are we now, Way? Hard to tell. About the same. I thought you were a financial genius. Okay, moving on to the other end. So we've got most SMEs will only ever use the most basic debt products. They're simple to understand, easy to access. Venture capital, a very kind of unique and specialist form of finance, appropriate to not many firms, even though many think they are appropriate. And then their kind of baby brothers or sisters, the business angels, they're perceived to be a bit cuddlier than venture capitalists, less capitalist than venture capitalists, maybe. So what do we think? So green if you think venture capitalists, business angels are geniuses. Red if you think they're sharks. Okay, we're very much in the shark pond, shark pool here. Right, our beloved government believes VCs are geniuses. That must be true because since the year 2000, they've invested about £338 million in a series, the longest series ever in the history of the world, of VC funds, typically favouring the hybrid model, the co-investment model, where government goes in as a relatively passive partner with a private venture capitalist. And it's certainly true that despite the evidence from various evaluations, including some that me and Pete have done, several, that the British Business Bank is still very committed to this model, the VC hybrid co-investment model, as a way of channeling cash to what are they called, high growth potential firms. So that's the way they like to do it. Unfortunately, the National Audit Office doesn't accord with the business department's view on this. The UK High Technology Funds, which is actually a fund of funds, but we won't get into technical details, they had a lovely return of minus 9.7%. So if I give you £1, I'm not getting that £1 back. But the genius private sector VCs in the technology space, they also made a loss. So if I give them £1, I get less than £1 back. Now the classic, the benchmark fund of all benchmark funds is the regional venture capital fund. So as is typical with any policymakers, if one region's got one, every other region has to have one, regardless of whether they need one or not. The fairness principle. Sweden's got one in the, they've got 12 VC funds coming on stream, and they've got one in the polar regions of Sweden. And I don't even know if anyone lives there. Certainly not much high-tech stuff. Maybe a bit of whale harpooning or tree felling. But they've all got one. And that's the general principle of EU policy and UK government policy, that once one region, one group's got one, everyone else has to have one too. So the RVCFs, now they had a stunning history, and thank God they've been stopped now. But the bottom line is that you started off with £74 million to invest, and you ended up with an estimate of 5.9 million. Now that's a pretty good way to lose a hell of a lot of taxpayers' money by giving it to these genius venture capitalists. So I'm thinking that this kind of doesn't square. It certainly doesn't square with media and particularly American rhetoric about VCs. They only talk about the good ones. It'd be like talking about football and only mentioning Lionel Messi. So I'm wondering, how is it that all VCs have got the biggest Rolex watches you've ever seen and drive Ferraris when you see them mincing around at these government dues? Now the secret is in the fund management fees. So even on government schemes, so this is our taxpayers' money here. So we're banging in 300 and whatever it was, 30 odd million pounds. And the people, the government, are asking basically to look after our taxpayers' money and channel it through to create jobs, innovation, all the good things that entrepreneurs do. So on the high-tech fund of funds, they're taking 17p in every pound we give them. The regional VC funds, the worst performing fund in the history of venture capital, they're taking 36p in every pound that we've given them. On the Bridges Fund, which actually wasn't as bad as all the others because they broke the rules and invested in property in London, and that saved the rest of the portfolio. They only cost us 29p for every pound invested. So that's the evidence in terms of what their investments achieve and then why they're still rich in spite of their lack of achievement, if you like. Now America, that great entrepreneurial culture where all things good happen. You know, we've all heard the picture. You probably can't move in Silicon Valley because there's more European policymakers doing day trips and extended jollies around there. You probably can't get anything done. So, America, the land of innovation and venture capital and all things good. Kaufman, charitable foundation, extremely well endowed with investment funds. They believed the VC genius story for 20 years. They invested serious amounts of their endowment funds in US, and they invested in prime US VC funds, brand name, household name funds. And their conclusion was it was a triumph of hope over experience. They hoped that VCs would deliver what they thought they would, great things, but they didn't. So for a very long time, 18 years or so, VCs will lose you money on average. They'll give you less cash back than you gave them. And there's the evidence. So this is US, and these are top-end VC funds in the US. And that's the net multiple is just, if I give you £1, what do I get back on average? So as we can see, the red line is what the market, if my kids threw darts at the FTSE 100, that would be, the red line would be the return they'd get. So on your left-hand side, we've got some wonderful, genius, genuinely talented VC fund, which delivers you £8 back for every pound you give them. And we've got a few more, but only 5, I think, that gave you more than £3 back for every pound you gave them. But then we've got these people down here who probably should be struck off if you could be in VC world, probably not. But let's say they're the not so talented VCs. In terms of what differentiates the good and bad VCs and how they do extract or help firms grow, help entrepreneurs build companies, it's generally about bringing together kind of complementary assets. So you get the specialist managerial skills of the VC, who take a very active involvement in companies. You get access to their networks, and they kind of collectively bring talent around an idea. So that would be those firms there, the VC funds there, and clearly not those. So in the numbers, so Kaufman over 20 years invested in 88 US top-end VC funds. About 2.5 years later, only 25% made an above market return, 75% didn't. Then we get, in the end, so we've got the 15% at the second up and the 7% at the top. So only 22% of those 88 funds that were invested by Kaufman made an above throw darts at the FTSE 100 return. So let's get to those lovely business angels now. So the nicer cousin of the venture capitalists. So what do people generally think they are? They're wealthy, they have capital to invest. It's claimed that they add human capital, so managerial experience, to the entrepreneurial input to the firm. So you get, it's a win-win. You get cash and you get management experience too. So it all seems good. They're not as profit motivated as formal VCs, but they're a massive part of the non-core bank financing landscape. They're probably at least 3 times more capital is provided to SMEs than the formal VC sector provides to SMEs. I think last year it was about 7 billion euros invested in European angel investments. They focus on earlier stages because they're more willing, allegedly, to go into the firms, take a functional role within them, but clearly they haven't got the scale or the capitalisation of VC funds, so on average their investments are smaller. So how much of their total wealth does the average UK business angel invest, willing to invest? And we get a kind of separation. So we get a group of them which will just put in about 5-10% of their total wealth. But then we get a much larger group who really go for it, and they're putting in between 20 and 75% of their total worldly wealth. So they're genuinely risk-taking people, because it would be quite a hard sell if you went back to your husband or wife and children and said, that 75% of our total life savings that I invested in these great entrepreneurial ventures, well, it all went wrong, and we're in poverty for the rest of our lives. And the evidence, so we asked them on a scale where 10 is you just love risk like nothing else, and 1, you're risk intolerant, risk averse. And again, they're on the I love risk scale. So these people are looking very, very promising, certainly compared to venture capitalists. So then we said, given that you're willing to invest quite a lot of your personal wealth in these small entrepreneurial ventures, do you take a strategic role? Do you help shape the direction of the company? So board level kind of input. Do you take an operational level input, so more on the day-to-day management side? And they kind of, 8 out of 10 of them said, no, we don't go near the firm. So we've got a really strange picture now. They're willing to invest 50-75% of their total wealth, but then they don't look after it. They just leave the entrepreneurs to do whatever they do. So they're definitely very strange people, these UK business angels. So the end game, can they make a profit? So roughly about 50% of them get their cash back. Just under a quarter lose cash, and just over a quarter make a profit, if you like. So then the question is, how much? If you're a winner, how much do you win? If you're a loser, how much do you lose? So the blue line's the winners. How much did you win if you won? And the red line is if you're a loser, how much did you lose? Now what's very clear is if you made a loss, on average it was a bad loss, or more likely to be a bad loss than if you won. So around 12.5% made a fairly good return of the total angel community, and about 18% made a horrendous loss. Then we asked one final question, which was, if you lost more than 50% or more of the cash you invested, would that be a trauma for you? And most of them said no. So that these truly are, when we talk about risk capital, we mistakenly lump venture capitalists in that box too. But it's clear that UK business angels are absolutely off the scale in terms of they provide risk capital, they love risk, they're prepared to take a loss so that they know the rules of the game. Much more than VCs do, who tend to invest in management buyouts, those kind of later stage activities. And they're in the right end of the market because they're more likely to invest in early stage, unproven entrepreneurs, unproven technologies, etc., etc. So what do we think now? Or do we need a VC's geniuses? Okay, yeah, not a lot of contention there. What about business angels? Do we like them a little bit more? Yeah, we like business angels. Okay. So it's widely assumed that innovation equals growth. Entrepreneurship, no, you could even extend it. Entrepreneurship equals innovation equals growth. And that's generally what the government minister would tell you and would definitely recite as a mantra walking around Victoria Street. So what about, I want to take you all back. Some of you might be too young to actually live this, so imagine it's 1995. So Oasis are in the charts, just broken into the charts. The US has just bailed out Mexico for $20 billion. There's a war in Bosnia. O.J. Simpson's been charged. He's on trial. And there's an earthquake in Japan. So if you can vaguely remember any of those things, you're back in the right time frame. So I'll just take three answers from people, first three people. So if we had 100 high-tech firms started in 1995, 20 years later, what do you think the proportions would be of those 100 firms in each square, each quadrant? Josh. Oh, and you know. Yeah. Wait, go on, you start me off. How many do you think would be in a failure?
99%.
99? God. Right, okay. Aidan, how many do you think would be in the successful exit bit? At 10? Howard, how many would be in this successful growth bit? 20 years from when they started. 10? Okay. There's the actual figures. This is probably the longest tracking study we've ever done. So 11% had a kind of cash loss, a costly failure. 12.5% have been bought out, so successful exit. 25% successful growth. And that would be much higher than non-technology based firms. The striking one for me, though, is the persistence. They're alive, but they're not doing much. And given that these are high-tech firms, so they will live forever, because once you get past year 6, or possibly year 10 in technology, then you'll be around forever. So a large chunk of even of the most highly innovative firms in the economy hang around, they persist, they're still alive, but they don't grow very much. Then we did a piece of work looking at, we're interested in the causal chain, and basically if the government can intervene in the economy to create a virtuous circle, positive circle around people, R&D, innovation, and then growth, and then that growth, profit, and then feeds back into increased funding, recruitment, more talented people, etc. So it creates a positive and increasing multiplier effect. And this is where I've always thought government does strange things, and they certainly don't talk to one another. So I worked on for two separate government departments on the same project once, in the not too recent past, Treasury and the Business Department. So the bit around people, so that would be in the education kind of minister's brief. Now we all know, because we are, lots of us are in education, that it's all about STEM stuff now. And then now we've got STEM with 2 M's because it includes medicine. So it's all about, throughout the education system, maths, science, engineering, computers, that's if we just need more of that. Because that implicitly means more innovation, more people capable of delivering innovation. So we've got the education department taking care of that. What they didn't work out in their calculations whether the firm population has the capability to employ all those super talented STEM people, but they kind of just carry on churning them out through the whole education system. And certainly did some back of an envelope estimates which suggest that the high-tech firm sector or component of the UK economy, there's no chance they could ever get near clearing up all these STEM graduates, never mind the lower down the educational kind of scale, A-level students, etc. Then we've got the business department. They're interested in R&D because they believe that there's a very clear and precise correlation between investing in R&D and innovation. And what they all want is more innovation, particularly more radical innovation. And they believe that R&D is a clear route through to new product services, new innovations, etc. Then we've got the innovation branch of the business department. Their focus is largely on radical innovation, which is the minority aspect, almost by definition, of all the innovative things that happen in the economy. And then overlaid on top of that, so we've got different government departments who haven't got particularly joined up thinking, and certainly different views on how we end up with more innovation. But then in everything, every kind of government type of intervention, we have a tension. So an entrepreneur, particularly an innovative entrepreneur, so you've got a great idea, a great new innovation, and the only reason you would spend time, effort and money in pursuing that innovation is so you can appropriate the returns to your talent, your innovation, the private returns. But where the UK economy, and hence public policy, would focus would be on the diffusion of innovation. We want it spread out to as many people, as many entrepreneurs in the economy as possible, which is precisely what the entrepreneur doesn't want. So we have some beautiful tensions between government departments, but also between the entrepreneurs who they're trying to help to innovate, be creative, and what's best for the UK economy in a wider sense. So then we looked at actually the causal growth path. So potentially it could go in any one of these blocks first, but we tested all of them, and that is the only way it works. If you get the blocks in any other order, they collapse and you don't get a chain, a logical building block. So the employment of talented people, particularly here STEM graduates, is the first and only building block which will ultimately end up with innovative new products and services. But where the government tends to intervene, certainly the business department, is that theirs is all about lowering the user cost of R&D, so enabling entrepreneurial firms, innovative firms, to invest capital in R&D. It always struck me as strange when we thought about it, because if you've got not clever people, then why would you throw money at them and hope innovation happens? But then the kind of sad or the dangerous thing from a public policy point of view for the UK economy is that once we've gone through this, the good entrepreneurs employed talented people, surrounded themselves with STEM talent. They've invested financial capital in R&D, so putting these people to work on innovative projects. And then you do end up with an increased probability of radical innovation. New services, new products. And that does feed through in the end into sales growth and profit. But then it stops. Now this is where UK entrepreneurs differ fundamentally from continental European entrepreneurs. And broadly, if you offered the UK population of 4.5 million entrepreneurs £1 million, they would say, thank you, go and buy a house in Southern Europe and play golf. This is not true of continental European entrepreneurs. It tends to be more around the actual engineering, the technology, the creating and growing a business. Whereas we've been accused of being more Anglo-Saxon in terms of generally as people and as an economy, in terms of we're more purely capitalist in our outlook and what we want from entrepreneurship. And that's roughly borne out in the evidence. So the chain stops there, so there's no virtuous circle at the firm level. So they take that profit from their talent and innovation and cash it in rather than reinvest it in further rounds of growth, hiring more talented people. And that's a kind of sad thing, because they've shown themselves to be good entrepreneurs, but they've broken the cycle. So what we get, so highly innovative firms on average will always be highly innovative firms over time. So the most innovative firms today will still be the most innovative firms in 5-10 years' time. But on average, those firms will have higher growth, but they still won't be the stellar growth that all policymakers expect. You know, they always quote Googles and stuff like that. So on average, innovation, highly innovative firms are a good thing, but they're not as good as policy people think they are. But then the more interesting thing for me is that, because we have, especially in business schools, we give types of firms stupid names like gorillas and gazelles and unicorns even. For depending on how fast you grow and et cetera. But the fact is, and there's tons of glossy management consultancy reports called things like the 10%ers, the something 6%, that Nesta report, what was it, the Vital 6%, and all this stuff. And their kind of underlying assumption is that those firms in that 10% or 6% or whatever the hell it is are the same firms over time, but actually they're not. So the fast growth firms today will not be the fast growth firms tomorrow. So in fact, growth is an episode in the life of lots of firms. So while the 10% is true, it's not the same 10% year on year. There was a roughly equal probability of a poor growth firm observed today will be a fast growth firm tomorrow compared to a fast growth firm today. So that fundamentally should reshape the way governments think about intervening. Because if once we've observed fast growth, then that's the time when you should stop supporting them, because they're not hugely likely to carry on. So what do we think? Does entrepreneurship and innovation lead to growth? Is there a clear line? Is innovation and growth, are they the same? That's what we've got. Yeah, most people would broadly support that. So does entrepreneurship pay? In the end, entrepreneurs, people who choose this as a career path, have to live, have to pay their mortgage, feed their family, etc. And for sure, it's hard work, as we've seen from the hours stuff. But more importantly, the rewards, the returns, the income stream is less certain than waiting for your monthly paycheck or salary check to go in the bank. So we hope to see maybe that entrepreneurs are rewarded for taking that level of uncertainty, putting their livelihoods at risk. So this is whole of Europe. That's why the numbers are quite low in some cases, because so it's in euros. I don't know what the current exchange rate is. So again, we've got solo self-employed is the blue bar, the job creating self-employed, the red bar, and the light greeny one, that's the wage people across the distribution. So broadly speaking, unless you're extremely talented as an entrepreneur, you're better off in an income sense in the wage sector of the economy, if income is your only objective, your primary objective. And even then, it's only the job creating, so the small firms rather than solo self-employed, that earn higher incomes than the equivalent waged employee. So you have to be in the top quartile of the whole entrepreneurial distribution to make it worth your while from a pure income sense. But then when we adjust for hours worked, and we showed earlier that entrepreneurs work much longer hours on average, and some of them work incredibly long hours. Once we adjust for that hourly differential, then you have to be in the top 10% of entrepreneurs, of the job creating entrepreneurs, to beat the top 10% of waged employees. So it's not clear from a straight income perspective why most people would choose an entrepreneurial career path. And we know that actually the motivations for being an entrepreneur are quite diverse around psychological things, desire for independence, to be free from the restrictions of bureaucracy, etc., etc. But also there's a slight misrepresentation. Because if you've got a firm that employs people, the firm will have a value, and potentially you could sell it on or cash it in. So there's other non-income related wealth possibly being created, or the assets in the firm. Okay, so we've covered quite a broad range of ground, and I've tried to kind of draw out what governments are doing, why they're doing it, and whether they're doing the right things, or is what they do consistent with the evidence. Hopefully challenge a few perceptions that you might have walked in with. I think what we've learned, or what I've learned, is that high quality entrepreneurship is quite rare. And it clearly requires commitment in terms of time, talent, but also a hell of a lot of luck too. And we know that's why modelling anything to do with entrepreneurs is quite difficult, and we can't explain too much of what goes on, what we observe. But I would argue that high quality venture capital is an even rarer occurrence. The link between innovation and growth is possibly not as clear as we think it is, or certainly as government policymakers think it is. UK business angels are clearly a very strange, if not mad, bunch of people. But on a positive note, they operate in exactly the right areas. When we talk about risk capital, that is risk capital. Everything they do appreciates that their capital is at risk, and the types of firms they invest in are A, the most capital constrained, and B, have a very high potential to deliver quite positive outcomes for the economy and for the entrepreneurs themselves. I think government probably needs to stop going on tours of Silicon Valley and appreciate that Europe is different, and possibly even America outside of Silicon Valley needs to appreciate that you can't replicate that kind of environment. So I would argue the government needs to think more deeply about what it does before it does things, about its justification for intervening in markets, and certainly who it gets into bed with when it partners up with private sector agencies. That's the end. That is the end. Thank you.